Alright, thought I'd do an overview for Jitsu Squad. Obviously, I've been busy with a number of projects, including feeding 10 kitties every day for the past several months. This game actually got funded already. I don't know how it got funded so quickly. I guess the fact that they had a playable demo helped. They had a pretty modest goal as well. I think they were only trying to raise like $20,000. I think right now they're at about $45,000. So right now they're just hitting stretch goals. I know that they have console ports, I guess, are already funded. Apparently, they don't have any kind of publisher, so they're going to have a lot of freedom to do things with this overall. Okay, so let's explain the mechanics here really quick. So you've got an S string, you have an uppercut, aerial attack, fireball, and you have pause combos as well. The problem is a lot of them use the same animations as your basic S string. I'm not exactly sure what the point of picking them up or using them is. You also have a parry. So my biggest problems with this game, before I get started with the actual gameplay, it's pretty easy to get into. It feels relatively responsive. The dash has a lot of recovery, for one thing. Also, it has a very large distance, so definitely overshoot enemies a lot, especially when you're doing stuff like this. Even if you push this to cancel it early, you still move forward quite a bit. Also, the hit stop can be a little bit excessive, especially when you start fighting the hyper-armored enemies. Sometimes it feels a little bit unfair that you get so much hit stop that you can't even really react properly. So you also have a secondary weapon. You have this. Overall, it feels kind of responsive and stiff at the same time. Mostly because of the hit stop. I have the same problem with Fight and Rage as well, but Fight and Rage has the ability to put it in turbo mode, which basically removes like almost all the hit stop. I think hit stop is kind of a touchy thing to have. It definitely makes the attacks feel like they have more impact, but it takes a lot of responsiveness away from the character, in my opinion. I'm not really sure how they can fix it. The other thing is that you just don't have that many moves. I actually know somebody who worked on this game. You may remember Shattered Realms. I did beta testing for that, and I gave some feedback for that as well. The combat designer on that is actually working on this game. Shattered Realms actually ended up never getting made, but he landed this job here, so you can see this game has a lot of similar mechanics. Unfortunately, it kind of falls apart on bosses because you just don't really have enough moves to really feel like you can get a satisfying punish. I already mentioned the lack of moves kind of being a problem, especially if this is going to be a longer beat-em-up. I know they're supposed to be leveling at some point, so maybe they plan to tie moves and attack speed and stuff like that to it. We all know with modern beat-em-ups like this, you don't have any progression system. It needs to be just a straight arcade-based game. And if you have a progression system, then that can help facilitate it being longer than an arcade-length game, meaning like an hour or less tops. When you have progression systems and stuff, you can definitely toy with having the beat-em-up be longer and not necessarily something that you have to finish in one sitting. But the way it is now, if they made like a 3-hour campaign of this with just this moves, I think it would lose its luster really fast. But this is pretty much, I wouldn't really call it a proof of concept. They have been working on this game for a while, but they just got to the point where they couldn't really fund it anymore. This is actually the second time they've tried to go to Kickstarter. to get the game crowdfunded. The first time it failed. There were a couple problems with the first time they did it. One of which was there was no demo. You all know how many games have poisoned the well on Kickstarter. You know, they don't actually make the game, or they just bail, or they ghost, or the game comes out and it's a piece of crap, like Mighty Number 9. People still haven't gotten their backer rewards from that and stuff. More recent example would be Wonderful 101, which was apparently already funded. I guess they just did it to, like, make sure that people actually still wanted to play Wonderful 101, but then the game still came out in stores. I bought it on GameStop for like $16 on the Switch like 2 weeks ago. So there's been a lot of people taking advantage of crowdfunding and not really using it in the proper way. These guys actually provided a demo, and they did get the game funded as well, so it's kind of a bit of a success story. Anyway, here's your moveset. So basically you have a lot of pause combos, but the problem with the pause combos is with the hit stop, it can be really hard to hit them unless you're only fighting like one enemy, and then also the fact that a lot of them use the same animation, so I assume that they do more damage. I haven't gotten clarification from the developer. Obviously I've been quite busy myself, but right now it seems like only the ones that use the unique animations like the Spinal 1 Chain 6 seem worth using. Then you have Fury State as well, which does change your moves quite a bit. Unfortunately, you can't really show that in the training mode, so let's just play the demo. And getting endless comments about this, and I just haven't been able to get around to it. I didn't really feel a sense of urgency like other crowd-funded games I've done this kind of thing for, because they got funded in the first 24 hours. Maybe enough time has passed since all the bad Kickstarters, even though the Wonderful 101 Kickstarter was only like barely a year ago. I ended up not liking that game that much, but the fact that that was my first backed crowd-funded game, and then they just went ahead and released it in stores for nothing anyway, really grinded my gears. A lot of other people feel the same way too. Like, they didn't actually need to do that Kickstarter. You only have one move in the air as well. You don't really have a lot of variety there. I'm sure they're well aware. You see how well polished this game is. I'm sure they're well aware that having like an 8-hour campaign of these same 5 moves would get really repetitive. You might remember Castle Crashers had that same problem. Like I said, Castle Crashers had the leveling and equipment system that helped make it a little bit less monotonous. Even though with the base gameplay mechanics, there wasn't much going on. See how much slower the hit stop paces the game. Nice, clean fight.
Let's go.
hit stop's always been a hot topic in beat 'em ups, or just in general. Some fighting games have too much hit stop as well. Feels like you don't have as much control as you would if the hit stop was not there. But then people complain about the lack of impact. There's very few games that can do both. I think the closest would probably be Assault Spy. Hits have a lot of impact in that game, but there's very little hit stop too. They can get it somewhat like that, where the hits still feel like they have impact, but it's not at the expense of the responsiveness of the character, and I think that would be pretty good. I definitely feel like I'm fighting the hit stop more than the enemies sometimes. I've just never been a fan of excessive hit stop. So, like I said, it's a very divisive subject in games like this. Pretty much anything involving melee combat. Imagine if, like, Neo 2 had another game I play frequently on here had, like, hit stop like this. You'd probably get killed a lot because of it. Alright, this is the last screen. Last set of screens. Fortunately, these enemies are not very interesting to fight because you only have one aerial move. You don't have like an aerial S-string or anything. Presentation is crazy in this game. Definitely one of the cleanest looking beat 'em ups that's come out recently. I know people were kind of divisive towards the hand-drawn art style in Streets of Rage 4. I think that game looks quite clean too. This looks even better. Very readable as well. You can tell what everything is doing pretty much.
Let's go!
These enemies are kind of dumb. Oh, you can go behind them. I didn't know that. So you get damage bonuses when you counter a consecutive amount of times, but due to the hit stop, countering's a little bit more awkward than you would expect. You are given a pretty large window, a pretty generous window as a response to that, but definitely not the most responsive parrying I've ever done. So I play a lot of games like this. Not a healthy amount.
All right, Benny, let's go!
Yeah, the parry doesn't really feel good to use because there's too much hit stop. Handled that room pretty poorly. Good example is when I did that S string on all those enemies and I couldn't really attack them because there's so much hit stop. Alright, we got to the boss without dying at least, but bosses in this game are pretty hardcore. They've been marketing that they are as strong as the player, and they're not lying. About to see. This is kind of where I feel like the combat system falls apart. Not because you don't have, like, tools to deal with their attacks, it's just kind of boring because you don't have that many moves. It's like they have more moves than you. It's like, yes, they're as strong as you, but they have, like, way more tools. It's kind of not fun. Alright, still got it. What an awesome demo. It's definitely got its flaws, but for, I mean, a game that's not even done, you can tell that they worked really hard to get this. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation was they did the Kickstarter for the first time, like, pretty much right when the pandemic started, so late February, early March. It was nowhere near getting funded. It's just an unfortunate reality. You know, there was a lot of uncertainty in the world, not like there still isn't. We're still in this pandemic, unfortunately, but things are at least starting to recover now. But at that time, there was a lot of financial uncertainty, people losing their jobs and stuff. They weren't really sure if they could back what was essentially a Kickstarter from people nobody had ever heard of, which, as you can see in this case, is actually kind of a blessing in disguise. We've been burnt by a lot of recent Kickstarters lately, like the Wonderful 101 Kickstarter and Mighty Number 9 several years ago, stuff like that. The fact that these guys came out of nowhere and actually made something that you can play that definitely qualify more than a proof of concept. I think the combat needs a lot of work. I think more moves overall would make the boss fights more dynamic. It doesn't really feel that satisfying to counter them because you don't really have enough tools to really punish. It's not like your standard defensive-based beat-em-up where you have a lot of moves to work with. Like in Fight and Rage, you know, you can parry and then go straight into a special and get a pretty decent combo off that, even though that game has a pretty restrictive combo system as well. It's mostly just that, the excessive amount of hit stops, a lack of moves, and the fact that the boss fights feel a little bit disjointed because they seem like they have, like, double the moveset you do. If you get into the super mode, you do have more moves there, but as you can see there, part of the problem is when they get their super mode, They're invincible. I think one thing they could do with the boss fights when they do get a little bit farther in this game is maybe make it so that maybe a counter will break them out of it or something. That would greatly increase the pacing. The fact that he was able to go into that mode twice was kind of unfair, really, because it's just a massive cluster of hitboxes, and all you can really do is just stand there and wait, which isn't particularly interesting. Anyway, if you're interested in backing the game, like I said, there's not really a large sense of urgency. It did get funded in the first day. I don't know if they undersold themselves or not. That's a common thing a lot of Kickstarters have been doing. Bloodstained would probably be the most recent example. They were only asking $500,000 for that game, which, whether or not you like that game, you can't really deny that 500 grand to make a game of that size with, you know, dual audio voice acting, all those languages translated, and the professional musicians and stuff like Michiru Yamane and everybody. It's not really something you can do. With that game, it was more of like an interest test to see if people still wanted that kind of game, which I think was kind of stupid because there were a lot of games like Hollow Knight and stuff out even at that time that were doing just as good, if not better, than the old Metroidvanias from Konami way back when. I don't know if they're doing like an interest test or not. As far as I know, they have no publisher. This is going to be self-published, which means they're going to have a lot more creative freedom with this overall. Hopefully, we'll get more moves, a little bit less hit stop, and then maybe make the boss fights a little bit more dynamic as a result. I think this game will go a long way. Like I said, they do mention leveling up on the Kickstarter page, so I assume that's going to lead to more moves or properties or something. I would not want to play 8 hours of this the way it is right now. I have to be honest with you. I feel like it would lose its luster within like the first maybe 2 to 3 hours. It definitely needs a little bit more expansion. I think this game is a more broad appeal than a lot of other beat-em-ups. It's very cartoony. It's a very accessible art style. I don't like how they're all animals, but, I mean, hey, maybe that's part of the reason why they got funded, too. But, you know, it's a game that kids can play. It's not all dark and gritty and gory like a lot of other beat-em-ups are these days. So I think it's got a chance to really get some younger people interested in it as well. Hopefully they'll just work on the mechanics a bit. So if you want to fund it, I believe they've knocked out like 4 Kickstarter stretch goals already. The Kickstarter stretch goals actually seem pretty nice as well. It's mostly just stuff like boss rush and things that would not like greatly increase the amount of development time. That's been a problem with a lot of Kickstarters as well, is they have these lofty stretch goals. It requires a lot of man hours, like whole new characters and campaigns and stuff, and then that stuff never comes out. Wonderful 101, for example, it's been about a year. None of those stretch goals are out yet, and then the game is already like bargain bin price at GameStop like 2 weeks ago. So I don't think this will get to that point. I don't think it's going to have what I like to call a stretch goal bloat or stretch goal power creep, where they add things that sound great on paper, but then they try to deliver them all at launch day, and then that just ends up delaying the game like a year or more, which just amplifies the problem of why people do not trust Kickstarters anymore. I'm really glad that this one got funded so quickly, and these guys obviously know what they're doing, and they're not out to scam anybody. It seems like they actually have their heads on straight. I actually do know the combat designer on this, so I'm glad that he was able to find a gig as well. Much like me, he's very passionate about beat-em-ups, and Shattered Realms, unfortunately, did not really get out of the concept stage, but this is actually going to get made now, so go ahead and download the demo for yourself. Back it if you want. I believe the tier for just buying the game, I think, is like $20, but if you want to be a beta tester, I think it's like $30 or $40. You have to adjust that to your local currency. I would recommend being a beta tester if you're a hardcore beat-em-up fan like I am. You can definitely give them a lot of feedback. I know they want to make this the best they can. I think it's got a great foundation, but the hit stop and the lack of moveset variety really hurts it. I mean, for a quick little vertical slice, 20-minute demo, it's fine, but 8 hours of this would lose its luster really quickly. So go ahead and support them, and I'll catch you guys later. Sorry it took so long to get to this. I've had a million things going on at once, feeding 10 kitties a night and then having all these other projects. I've got Foregone and East 9 I haven't even touched yet because I've been so busy with other games. Once I get back to those, probably have more time to do more side stuff like this. Thanks for watching.